Kicking off at number 5, Theatre de la Ville. Not gonna lie, this one is equal parts morosely charming and also completely terrifying. The Theatre de la Ville, meaning the City Theatre, was opened on the 30th of October and has a rich history of misfortune and tragedy. Until the fall of Napoleon III in 1870, it was known as the Imperial Theatre and showcased the dignitary of Paris in all their theatrical glory. One of the more tragic tales surrounding the theatre is the story of the French romantic poet and public eccentric Gérard de Nerval, who is best known for his sordid travel diaries and his strange habit of roaming the streets of Paris with his pet lobster in hand. Tragically, Nerval committed a grisly suicide in a particular shady corner of a nearby narrow street, and in death it is said that his spectre haunts the theatre. Spectators claim to have seen his form pop up on stage in a ghostly ploy to distract the actors. Apparently he's lost his lobster though. Next up at number 4, Parc Montsouris. Parc Montsouris is a picturesque picnic park in the heart of Paris, an otherwise perfect landscape for tourists and locals alike to enjoy on a hot summer's day. Opened in 1863, Parc Montsouris is one of the largest green spaces in Paris, comprised of 4 others which were created by Napoleon III and his prefect of the Seine, Baron Haussmann. They were made to be enjoyed by the ever-growing Parisian population and still are to this very day. Strange then that the grim history of a nearby paranormal hotspot is regularly avoided, blending both historical fact and local legend. The name of the park's only tomb, the Rue de la Tombe Issoire, which hints at its most notorious legend, that is Essai de Montsouris, a brigand who terrorized Paris during the 9th century, looting and pillaging passing travelers of the green area. Eventually he was caught and his head was lopped clean off by William of Aquitaine. But it didn't stop his spirit from continuing his terrifying regime, being one of the most notorious spirits to have been sighted in modern day Paris, often appearing at the park's Palais du Bardo. It may sound like hocus pocus, but still, stranger still, in 1911 the Palais was controversially sold to the government, but mysteriously it burnt down before any work could commence on it. The work of Montsouris? Well, probably. Coming in at number 3, The Man in the Black Coat. And I just absolutely love this creepy tale because it reminds me of one of my favourite films of all time, Midnight in Paris. It's not scary in the slightest, but check it out if you haven't. Great film. Anyway, as the legend goes, on one particular warm evening in 1925, a man named Jean Romier was sat reading in the grounds of the Jardin du Luxembourg when a handsome man in a black coat approached him and after conversation invited him to a private concert at his nearby home. Romier followed the man to his apartment on the Rue de Vaugirard, where he was treated to a delightful evening of classical music and poetry. After enjoying his night, Romier left, and on his way home he went to light a cigarette, but realised that he'd left his lighter back at the apartment. He ran back upstairs to the 3rd floor and knocked on the door, but to no response. He knocked and knocked when a nearby neighbour came out of their apartment, annoyed at all the banging, and told Romier that no one lived there. It had been abandoned for at least 20 years, after the previous tenant, a talented musician, had tragically passed away. Since then, any local Parisian will tell you that if you linger late enough in the Jardin du Luxembourg, eventually a man in a black coat will invite you to his apartment for a private concert. Would you go? Me? Nah, I'm alright. Swinging in at number 2, we have the Jardin des Tuileries, which, while having a beautiful sounding name, is actually the scene of an incredibly bloody past and dark history. In the 16th century, the feared and nefarious Queen of France, Catherine de Medici, had many enemies, conspirators who'd like nothing more than to bludgeon her in her sleep and remove her from the throne. Because of this, she employed the brute strength and bloody tactics of her henchman, Jean the Skinner, who rounded up her enemies and set about on a campaign to murder them all. He did exactly that, and he was very effective at it. So effective that Queen Catherine herself started to grow paranoid of him, because he knew so many of her secrets and political intrigues. Well, of course, she decided the only course of action was to execute Jean the Skinner outside her palace at Tuileries. Since then, the Red Man, also known as the Red Spectre, has been known to haunt the gardens in his blood-red attire. Marie Antoinette is said to have seen him just before losing her head, and it's commonly known that Napoleon consulted him during his rise as emperor to predict the outcome of forthcoming battles. That's pretty useful. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Les Catacombes. Because after all, it can be no other. There's no denying that the creepiest, eeriest, most paranormal place in Paris is the endless catacomb caverns that wind their way through the streets below. The catacombs of Paris are a myriad of underground ossuaries that allegedly hold the remains of more than 6 million people, which were created in an effort to eliminate the city's overflowing cemeteries. Whether you believe the tales that surround this haunted place or not, there's no denying that the Paris catacombs catacombs are an undeniable effigy to the dead and long-lost souls of the City of Lights. Although there have been terrifying tales of entire tour groups going missing, people driven to insanity after being lost in the long dark of its winding tunnels, it's much simpler to see the real haunting that the catacombs possess, because the ghosts are in the very bones themselves, in the million memories that they represent, entire walls and tunnels built by the skeletal bones of the city's residents that have passed in and out of memory through a long, vibrant, rich, and oftentimes bloody history. Paris has seen a lot in her time, and the tunnels, well, they'll keep on going. Kicking off at number 5, Building 2283, Okinawa. Throughout modern history and following the events of World War II, Japan has seen a large military occupation, the majority of which come from the US. Because of that, these collisions of culture have been met with some pretty spooky outcomes. One of those is Building 2283 at the Kadena Air Base, which is actually a single unit family home in a residential area, which was historically reserved for mid-grade officers and high-ranking civilians. Well, of course, no one lives there anymore, and the Kadena Air Base goes out of their way to make sure the building is eerily maintained. Whatever happened before the US moved in is unclear, but tales of a grisly murder are the main consensus. A number of families occupied the residence, but all of them soon reported the same stories. Water faucets and lights turning on and off by themselves, the sound of children laughing and crying just out of earshot, and the sight of a woman washing her hair constantly in the utility sink. Allegedly, the origin of the haunting comes from a family who occupied the house sometime in the late 70s, a teenage girl who was obsessed with keeping herself clean, and an abusive stepfather that stabbed her to death and then killed himself. Next up at number 4, Gridley Tunnel, Yokosuka. Again, another ghostly tale that comes from the military. The Gridley Tunnel on the Yokosuka Naval Base is a narrow, one-way tunnel that runs directly underneath a hill from Gridley Lane to Nimitz Boulevard, an access route running away from Yokosuka that was repurposed from an ancient fortification that existed before the modern naval base was built in the 1870s. Allegedly, the staggering amount of the exact same sighting is what has given this ghost its legend. As people drive through the one-way tunnel, they glance in the rearview mirror and see a bloody samurai chasing them. Some people have been so startled by the sighting that they've totaled their vehicle into the side of the tunnel, and the ghostly samurai often emerges on rainy nights between midnight and 1 AM. As the legend goes, the apparition is the ghost of a long-dead samurai who was on his way to avenge the death of his feudal lord when he was ambushed by the same assassins and brutally killed. Allegedly, because he failed his mission of vengeance, he cannot leave the tunnel and is left to wander eternally. Coming in at number 3, the Hanging Ruins, Osaka. In the Shinsekai district of Osaka, there lies the remains of a burned out 4-story building that has eerily been dubbed by locals as the Hanging Ruins. As the legend goes, in the early 2000s, the apartment building burned out in a tragic fire, where it remained for years untouched and unrepaired. In 2005, an employee of a local spa located from across the ruins spotted a strange long object dangling from its roof. Well, the employee decided to call the authorities, who investigated and realized that the strange object was in fact a corpse. The next day, there was a mysterious pair of shoes dangling from where the body was found. A few years later, another local was passing by and they spotted what appeared to be a life-size doll hanging from the same rooftop. Eerily enough, it turned out to be yet another corpse, and yet again another mysterious pair of shoes were found dangling the next day. Eventually, curious folks started throwing pairs of shoes from the building in tribute to the mysterious corpses found there. As far as the residents of Osaka are concerned, there have been at least 3 bodies found in the Hanging Ruins, yet who they were or what they were remains a mystery. Swinging in at number 2, the Doryodo Ruins, Tokyo. Doryodo, also referred to as the Haunted Temple of Hashioji and translates roughly to the End of the Road Temple, is known as one of the most haunted locations in Japan and has been host to some grisly and ghostly tales throughout its history, ever since it was first constructed in 1590. As one of its many legends goes, in 1963, an 82-year-old woman who was in charge of maintaining the site was approached by a robber. The woman tried to fight back against the criminal and was tragically killed as a result. Days later, locals reported the ghostly sounds of a woman sobbing in the forest, a spirit that was tragically bound to the ruins. Exactly 10 years later, in 1973, a female university student was caught up in an affair with her English literature professor, who was married and had 2 small children. When word of the affair got out, things ended tragically, and the professor ultimately killed the young girl, burying her body in a shallow grave at the site of the Dorado ruins. It didn't end there though. The act of murder drove the professor to madness, and weeks later, the corpse of him, his wife, and his 2 children were found washed up by some nearby cliffs. To this day, locals have reported hearing a young woman whispering, I'm here, alongside the sound of an old woman sobbing. And finally, at our number 1 spot, Ekogahara Forest, Yamananshi. Of course, it has to be perhaps the most notorious and infamous location in the whole of Japan. Ekogahara Forest, also known as the Sea of Trees, is a beautiful location that historically has harbored a very dark and eerie past. Since the 1800s, the forest, which sits in the shadow of Mount Fuji, has had a reputation with being a gateway for the Yurei, the ghosts of the dead in Japanese mythology, and has been revered as a location and site for communicating with spirits. It was also connected to the ancient practice of ubusute, a mythical Japanese practice where an elderly person was taken to a forest to die. It wasn't until 1961 that the forest began its grisly reputation with suicide, when a famous Japanese writer, Seiko Matsumoto, penned the novel Nami no To, Tower of Waves, where the lead characters tragically committed suicide in the confines of the forest. In 2010, more than 200 people attempted to take their own lives in the forest, and tragically, that figure continues to rise as Japan struggles to confront its staggering suicide rate and battle with mental illness. Ekogahara Forest continues to be a human reminder of these lives lost and the tormented spirits that still linger there.
Coming in at 5, West Virginia Penitentiary. Opened all the way back in 1875, the West Virginia Penitentiary in Moundsville is said to be one of the most haunted prisons in the states. The first building constructed on the site was the North Wagon Gate, which was made with hand-cut sandstone. The state used prison labor during the process, and work continued on this first phase up until 1876. Following completion, the prison consisted of the North Wagon Gate, north and south cell blocks, a kitchen, dining area, hospital, and chapel, as well as a 4-story tower connecting the 2 administration buildings. The prison also included space for female inmates and personal living quarters for the warden and his family. Once the prison opened, it housed 251 male inmates, including some who helped construct the prison where they were incarcerated. The condition of the prison worsened throughout the years, and the facility was eventually ranked as one of the top 10 most violent correctional facilities. On Wednesday, November 7, 1979, 15 prisoners escaped from the prison, one of them being Ronald Turney Williams, who was serving time for murdering Sergeant David Lilly of the Beckley Police Department. He managed to steal a guard's weapon and reach the streets where he encountered 23-year-old off-duty state trooper Philip S. Kesner, who was driving past with his wife. Kesner attempted to take action against Williams, but he was shot in the process. The prison was home to riots, fires, and nearly 100 executions during its time in operation. To this day, visitors have reported sightings of phantom inmates and a shadow man wandering the premises, as well as unexplained voices and cold spots. You can take tours around this haunted penitentiary and even view the electric chair dubbed Old Sparky. For you brave souls out there, you can also do an overnight session if you dare. Coming in at 4, North Bend Rail Trail Tunnel number 19. North Bend Rail Trail is located in Ritchie County in West Virginia and is a favorite for hikers, cyclists, and horseback riders traversing the 72-mile-long trail. However, proceed with caution if you wind up in the area, particularly around tunnel number 19, also known as the Silver Run Tunnel. History goes that on one foggy evening in 1910, an engineer spied a young woman in a flowing white dress standing on the tracks. He brought the train to a stop, but when he searched for the woman, she had vanished. He wasn't the only one to spot her either, many of his predecessors had as well. No one quite knows the origin of the woman in white, although some bones were found under a house near the tunnel. Some people say you can still spot her. Now, those who explore the tunnel are advised to bring a flashlight even during the day, with the tunnel being over 1,376 feet long, which is beyond sunlight's reach. You have been warned. Coming in at 3, Droop Mountain Battlefield. On November 6, 1863, the Battle of Droop Mountain occurred in Pocahontas County, West Virginia during the American Civil War. Confederate forces engaged but failed to prevent Union forces under General W. Averill from a rendezvous with other Federal troops in a joint raid on Confederate railways. Droop Mountain was one of the largest engagements in West Virginia during the war and essentially resulted in the Confederate collapse. The battlefield site is now preserved and administered by West Virginia as a state park, and the unknown Confederate dead are buried in the Confederate Cemetery at Lewisburg. A wooden observation tower, hiking trails, and picnic tables mark the grounds where the Civil War soldiers fought, died, and some say still remain. Many visitors have reported sounds of galloping horses and sightings of the ghosts of headless Confederate soldiers, as well as one soldier lying asleep against a tree. Coming in at 2, Lake Shawnee Amusement Park. In the late 1700s, the Clay family moved to West Virginia, which is presently known as Mercer County. The Clay family, comprised of Mitchell and his wife, settled on an 800-acre farm and raised 14 children. However, in 1783, tragedy struck while Mitchell was out hunting. A few members of the Shawnee tribe killed 2 of the Clay children and burned another at the stake. In retaliation, Mitchell hunted down a handful of Native Americans and killed them. The land in turn became unoccupied for years, up until the early 1900s when Conley T. Snyder purchased the land and built a small amusement park on it. However, the amusement park had just as unfortunate luck as the Clay family. The park featured a Ferris wheel and a swing ride and was popular among locals, particularly families of coal miners who resided in the area. In the early 1950s, a young girl on the swing ride was killed when a truck delivering sodas accidentally backed into the ride, striking her. Another child also drowned in the swimming pool, which was subsequently filled in to prevent further accidents. During its operation, at least 6 people died at the park, which resulted in the park ultimately closing in 1966. In 1985, Gaylord White, a former employee of the park, purchased the land with plans to reopen it. It happened for a brief period, that is, before the park closed again after a 1988 archaeological dig uncovered numerous Native American artifacts, as well as human remains on the property that had been buried prior to the arrival of the Anglo-European settlers. In total, 13 skeletons were uncovered, mostly of young children. Perhaps the property is cursed, or perhaps it's just a series of unfortunate events. Who knows? But one thing is for sure, it is one of the most haunted places in the entire world. And finally, coming in at number 1, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. The Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum, also known as the Western State Hospital, was a Kirkbride psychiatric hospital that operated from 1864 to 1994 by the government. Originally built by Richard Andrews, it was constructed from 1858 to 1881 and was originally designed to hold 250 people. However, it became overcrowded in the 1950s, with the hospital housing 2,400 patients, resulting in it being forcibly closed in 1994 due to changes in patient treatment. Following its closure, it was then purchased by Joe Jordan in 2007 and is open for tours and other events to raise money for its restorations. During tours of the facility, witnesses have reported doors slamming, shadowy figures, and even blood-curdling screams from within the building walls. The asylum has garnered such a spooky reputation it has appeared on shows such as Ghost Stories, Ghost Hunters, Ghost Adventures, and Paranormal Lockdown. It was also featured in Bethesda's 2018 video game Fallout 76 under the name Fort Defiance and acted as a base for the Brotherhood of Steel, one of the game's main factions. Coming in at number 5, we have Ozone Disco. What a name, I kinda wanna go. In March of 1996, a tragic accident happened in Q-Zone City's Ozone Disco. The local universities had just done their yearly graduation ceremonies. The students were looking to celebrate, and there was a party being thrown for them at the disco. There were around 350 guests attending that night, even though the building had only been cleared to safely hold 35 people. Due to the large amount of people in such a small place, when the fire broke out, they did not stand much chance of escape. Tragically, around 200 people did not make it out that night. Not only did the fire consume the lives of many, but others were trampled in the chaos of trying to escape. The one fire exit the building had been blocked by the building next door, meaning the large amount of people who fled to it to escape became trapped. It was reported that when entering the building to look for survivors, the bodies were piled up waist high. Survivors of the fire explained how around midnight sparks started flying from the DJ booths shortly after smoke appeared. Partygoers thought it was part of the experience, that it was all pyrotechnics to mark the new day. This meant that many did not flee as soon as they should have. All of this combined into a huge tragedy that claimed the lives of so many who were just about to start their lives. Since the incident, the club has been closed and abandoned. However, those who are around the club at night have witnessed some paranormal activity. Some have heard music coming from the club's doors or seen disco lights from a distance. You might think these are just kids who have snuck into party, but others have heard disturbing screams for help, but as they got closer to investigate, the screams fade away. There is a clear warning to those who might try to visit the place today that it's not safe. You might meet a paranormal spirit angry from the tragedy, or you might have a dangerous accident of your own. Coming in at number 4, we have Malacañang Palace. Malacañang Palace is the White House of the Philippines. It is the official residence and principal workplace for the President of the Philippines. It was originally built in 1750, so it has a long history, making it perfect for some paranormal happenings. The building has been home to many important people, but has also been a part of revolutions within the country, leading to many tragic passings on the property. In particular, there is one story that during one of the revolts by the people, they stormed and seized the home. They found one presidential worker who is now unknown and made their own justice. Although this is not a confirmed story, it is often told to explain one of the paranormal guests who has been pictured outside of the home. They have been named the Headless Ghost. The photo captured shows the outside of the palace with a headless figure facing the camera. It is thought that this poor soul was separated with his head before passing and now walks the halls searching for it. He is not the only ghost that has been spotted on the premises though. There have been sightings of former presidents, such as Manuel Quezon and Manuel Roxas. There is also a report where Governor Amy Marcos, daughter of Ferdinand Marcos, actually saw Quezon's ghost at one point during her father's presidency. I guess when you dedicate your life to serving as president, it is hard to let go of the place you call home. If you were to visit, maybe keep your camera handy. You never know who you might just see. Coming in at number 3, we have Clark Air Base Hospital. Clark Air Base Hospital was used during World War II and the Vietnam War. It now lays abandoned on a redeveloped Air Force base. It is said that as soon as you enter the destroyed building, you instantly feel the paranormal energy that belongs there. The locals believe it to be cursed and dare not enter. Due to this, it is seen as the most haunted hospital in the country. The hospital has been ravaged by time, most parts overgrown with greenery, with others simply falling apart. The hospital today does still attract ghost hunters. Due to the amount of pain and suffering that occurred during its time, there are plenty of lost spirits trapped. A number of visitors have reported hearing voices echo through the empty halls of the hospital. Some hear screams. It is said that the voices of those trapped are of the soldiers who lost their lives in the war. It seems they feel they have unfinished business in the world. Many would have left behind their families to serve their country. These are not the only patients still staying there though. The first floor ward was home to the hospital's pediatric center. People have heard the screams of newborn babies and children laughing. One security guard even heard the running footsteps of what sounded like a child. This entity ran straight past him one night while on patrol. He has since refused to patrol within the hospital walls. The hotel did still operate after the war until a nearby volcano erupted, covering the hospital in ash. This was taken as a sign by the locals that nature was warning them to stay away. There are also those who ignore the warnings and venture inside. Just be warned, it seems to have a habit of causing tragedy. Coming in at number 2, we have Laparol House. The Laparol House was built by Roberto Laparol in the 1930s. During World War II, the house was used by Japanese soldiers. They were reportedly a nasty group of brutes. They attacked local women, tortured suspected ties, and even ended their life once they received any information that they had. The house is said to have seen many horrors due to all of this, and the home was never the same after the soldiers left. Those who had been there within this time warned others to stay away. The house transferred ownership after the death of the head of the Laparol clan. They attempted to maintain the home, but the years and horrors do show on the home's old exterior. The house has withstood much more than those around it, both man-made and natural disasters. To everyone's surprise, the house was still standing after the deadly earthquake of 1990. In 2013, the home was turned into a museum. It was at this point that we started to hear more details about the hauntings inside. The show has been visited on many ghost haunting shows, along with being featured in a film. Those who have visited the house have told of what they found and why the house is visited often by paranormal investigators. One visitor claimed that they heard screams coming from the lower sections of the home. They rushed to go see if someone was hurt, but they found nothing. As they read more about the home, they believe this could have been linked to where the torture happened during the war. Others felt a dark presence in various sections of the home, cold spots or a feeling of sadness that disappeared as quickly as they had felt it. Some said they felt watched, like there is an entity in the home that no one can see, but it is watching all who visit closely. One man claimed he heard water running in the rooms, but when he went to turn it off, there was nothing there. Not even a source for any water to be coming from. The home is haunted by the ghosts of the past, but might also hold an ancient entity that causes you to feel watched. Either way, this is not a home I'll be visiting anytime soon. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Manghit Cave. Manghit Cave got its name from the smell of the accumulated bat droppings inside the cave. Located in the central Philippines, this is a scary location due to more than the hauntings. Many people are scared of entering dark and possibly unstable caves, but this one contains more than just the fear of confined spaces. The cave is popular by those who like to explore deep into caves in their spare time, but do it at your own risk. The cave is said to be haunted by lost caving groups. The cave does not offer much light, and the deeper you go, the more lost you get. There have been a number of groups that have gone lost throughout the years with no remains ever recovered. There are so many hidden corners within its maze you will never be found. Those who explore it today have encountered a number of paranormal occurrences. Some report seeing shadows not cast by them or their group like there is someone else with them. Others have heard footsteps scrambling around as if in panic. Finally, the further in you travel, the more you hear a distant scream of help. Often only one of 2 members of your team will hear this. No matter how far towards the voice you go, it will keep seeming out of reach. This causes people to go further and further into the caving system until their team bring them to their senses to head back. Those who have experienced this believe it may be how the others have gone missing. Some say there may be a demon living deep within the cave looking to bring the lost souls to feast on. Coming in at number 5, we have Stalin's country house. Stalin spent 4 months every summer at his country home between 1943 and 1953. Located near downtown Sochi, his time here put his town on the map forever. For anyone unfamiliar with Stalin, he was a dictator for the Soviet Union from the 1930s until his death in 1953. He was responsible for the genocide of around 20 million people. His house had been mostly kept the same, and tours are given about the history of his life. The house gives insight into his life and mindset. Part of the home is even a hotel where people can sleep in the same room as the man who created so much destruction. He demanded the house be made completely green so that it could blend in with the surroundings and he would be harder to find. He also refused to have any carpets in the home. He wanted to hear intruders' feet on the stone floor if someone was approaching him. He was clearly paranoid even when summering in his country home. He worked from his office during the night with a phone connected directly to Moscow and would sleep during the day. He often changed the room that he slept in so that nobody would know exactly where he was. Stalin's height was around 5'5", which might not seem important, but it was reported that he had short man syndrome. Due to this, and it's reflected in the build. His pool was only 5 feet deep as opposed to the typical 8 feet deep. The house is eerie and unpleasant for many reasons. Not only can you see into the dark mind of the dictator, but you might catch a glimpse of the man himself. People have seen him walking around the home in his white jacket and smoking his trademark pipe. Some have heard footsteps walking around at night. The noise echoes through the home. Those who have stayed there have said the air can feel terrifying at times, like you're being watched or like you're not welcome. Because you're not. Coming in at number 4, we have St. Michael's Castle. St. Michael's Castle was built in 1801 for royal residence in St. Petersburg. The castle interestingly looks different from each angle as the architects used various styles. It was built like a fortress as the royal family was in fear of assassination. This turned out to not be enough, and their fears were validated when Paul I was assassinated. He has moved into the castle 40 nights earlier. He was attacked in his bedroom by a group of dismissed officers. They tried to force him to sign his abdication from the throne. He resisted and the attackers continued. He was succeeded by his son, Emperor Alexander I. After Paul's passing, the family returned to the Winter Palace. The castle was gifted to the army in 1823. In the early 1990s, it became a museum. It is considered that Paul's spirit is now trapped, unable to leave the castle. It seems to be very restless and is often seen by visitors to the museum. He has mostly been seen walking down corridors carrying a candle. Others have claimed to hear distant screams from closed off parts of the castle. It echoes in the wall like a whisper. People have reportedly tried to celebrate the spirit and speak with it to bring it peace, but after all these years it still appears to be restless and angry about what happened all that time ago. Coming in at number 3, we have House on the Embankment. The House on the Embankment is a block-wide apartment building that was built in 1931. With the relocation of the capital from St. Petersburg to Moscow, there was an increase in housing demand for civil servants. The apartments were luxury for their time, including telephones, central heating and high ceilings. When the Great Purge happened in the late 1930s, the residents were detained in their homes. During this time, the building was referred to as the House of Preliminary Detention. As well as the residents, they would bring people they had detained elsewhere and force them into the apartments. Reports say that the apartments hold up to 5 sets of occupants at one time. During this time, over half of the original residents disappeared. It is believed they had been taken away, but no one ever knew they were simply never seen again. In present day, there are 505 apartments within the building, some used as offices, as well as theatres, restaurants and retail stores. The Great Purge left a mark on the building that it may never shake. Many executions were performed on the premises during this time. It is believed that the building is full of ghosts, victims of that time that cannot move on. Residents have seen paranormal things from within their home that they cannot explain. Some have seen things in the corner of their eyes. It appears like someone is walking around their home, but when they turn to see, they have gone. One terrified resident even reported seeing a man at the end of their bed, staring at them as they slept. When they jumped up from fear, the man disappeared. From all the stories we hear, it seems like the old residents are still attempting to live in their homes, lost and confused about what happened to them. Coming in at number 2, we have Griboyedov Canal. The Griboyedov Canal is located in St. Petersburg. It was constructed in 1739 alongside the existing river Krivusha. It is rare that a canal would be haunted, but the haunting is more of a yearly thing that you should avoid at all costs. The story goes back to 1881 with the Russian Empire revolutionary Sofia Perovskaya. She was arrested here and there for the revolutionary talk, but it was her final plan that would become the end of her, when her friend was arrested days before she took over the responsibility of the planned attack on Alexander II. The night before the attack, she helped to assemble the bombs that they were going to use. The attack went off as planned and Alexander II passed away due to her actions. She was quickly captured and was to be trialed for her crimes. Her friend, who was arrested the day prior, wanted to save his own life and turned in the rest of the participants. They were tried and sentenced to hanging. She was the first woman in Russia sentenced for acts of opposing her country. It was reported that her acts inspired other activists around the world in the years following. The day she died was March 22nd. It is now said that each year on the night of March 22nd, the air is misty. If you were to be walking down the canal, you would see the ghost of a young girl walking up and down the canal. She looks completely blue with a red mark on her neck. The worst part of the tale is that those who meet her become cursed. She is a bad omen. It is even rumored that she has caused pedestrians their lives. There have been a large number of mysterious disappearances or people falling into the river late at night when no one is around. Luckily, she can only appear once a year, so as long as you stay clear on that night, you should be safe. And finally, coming in at number 1, we have Moscow Kremlin. The Kremlin is a world-famous fortified complex in the center of Moscow. It is the best known of the Kremlins. It includes 5 palaces, 4 cathedrals, along with the enclosing wall and towers. The complex is now the official residence of the President of the Russian Federation, as well as a museum for tourists. Before it was a museum for the public, it was used for the Soviet Union, and remnants of this still remain. The corridors are still lined with brown Soviet tiles, and the walls still have some of the secret communication wires. There have even been bones uncovered during archaeologists' dig in the underground storage rooms. They once buried their own on site. Some of the findings date back to medieval times. There are many mysteries hidden within the vast space of the Kremlin. There are still sections of the Kremlin today that go mostly unused, and many things may have not been uncovered to this date. There have been wars fought and secrets kept within the walls, and some of them have led to restless spirits trying to contact the living. There have been sightings of various ghosts as well as other unexplained paranormal activity that takes place while guests visit. One of the most common sights is that of an old soldier. At first he seems to blend in with the other security, but as you begin to notice his old uniform, he will often vanish. He has been seen by different guests on different occasions, but no one has been able to get closer to the spirit to see who they are or why they might be there. There have also been sightings of what is believed to be the royal children playing. They were all baptized on site during the 17th century. The monastery was unfortunately blown up in 1929 to make room for the new buildings. Around that site you can sometimes hear children playing, and some have even claimed to see children dressed in older looking clothing. It is believed their spirits choose to rest here, as it was where they grew up and had a deep connection to the place. These are just a couple of instances of hauntings around the site. There is so much more to discover and see at the Kremlin.
Number 5 on this list is the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City was constructed in the early 1400s for the Ming Dynasty. This palace served as the base of operations for any political ongoings that China was involved in for several hundred years. It was also the home to the Chinese emperors and their families. The complex is massive, consisting of 980 buildings, 8,886 rooms, and being 178 acres in area. The Forbidden City was listed as a World Heritage Site in 1987 and is no longer used for political business, but now acts as a tourist attraction. This palace is estimated to be worth over $70 billion US, which makes it the most valuable palace and piece of real estate on the entire planet. I imagine that when they were valuing this palace, palace though, they didn't factor in that it's deeply haunted. The Forbidden City has been home to many Chinese emperors during its existence. During its time, it's seen them partake in a wide array of atrocities. The murder of Chinese slaves has happened countless times. Granted, this hasn't always been done by an authoritative figure, but skirmishes between servants and slaves have happened many times throughout this palace's history. And also, it hasn't just been slaves, but others have been murdered within these walls too. Many people speculate on some of the sinister acts that have happened here, but many of those acts have never been proven. This leads to the secrecy that has shrouded this place since its construction. Nowadays, this Forbidden City is haunted by several ghosts and ghouls. One of the most famous sightings was from a guard. They swore that while they were on duty, they were approached by a lady in white without any face at all. This legend has been echoed by some of the other people over the years, although this lady's origin is unknown. Many people also report the sound of music coming from thin air as they walk through the palace. They also hear the laughter and crying from other women that can't be seen. It's believed that these are the ghosts of some of the concubines that used to live in this palace. The Forbidden City is one of the coolest palaces in the world, but we have to remember that it was forbidden for a reason. Number 4 on this list is Tuen Mun Road. This road is a highway in Hong Kong that links Tuen Mun and Tsuen Wan. The highway is only 19.4 kilometers long and for the most part is well kept. It was constructed in 1977 and during its short time of being active has developed quite the legend around it. This road is considered to be one of the most haunted roads on the entire planet, and that is largely due to the significant amount of death that it's seen. In 1978, it had its first fatal crash, and since then it has amassed massive numbers of accidents. In fact, this road has had hundreds of accidents, with many of them being fatal. Some people blame poor road design, but the surviving victims from the crashes, they blame ghosts. This road is believed to be haunted by a bunch of spirits. It's said that these accidents keep happening because the ghosts will appear in the middle of the road. Upon first glance, people will think that they're about to hit a person, swerve to get out of the way, and effectively cause an accident themselves. The biggest problem with this road is that it keeps getting more and more haunted. Like a virus, the people who die from spirits then become the spirits that are haunting the road. Nowadays, there are hundreds of spirits that haunt this road and can appear at any time right in the middle of it, causing chaos and death. One of the most notable accidents that happened here was that of a bus in 2003, where 21 separate people died. This highway is a hazard to say the least, and one that I would avoid going down if I was ever visiting China. Number 3 on this list is Fengdu. Fengdu had to be included in this list because it's also literally called the Ghost City. It is a massive collection of shrines and temples that are dedicated to the afterlife located on the Ming Mountain. This place was built over 2,000 years ago and is deeply rooted in Chinese culture. The reason that it's called the Ghost City isn't just because people believe it to be haunted today, but because of a legend that took place many years ago. 2 imperial officers named Ying Changshen and Wang Fangping went to the mountain to practice Taoism. Whilst they were at this place, the pair performed a ritual to become immortal. When you combine their 2 names into Ying Wang, you get the translation King of Hell. This goes along with the stories that these 2 immortal beings will drag people down to the underworld. This site and these 2 immortals are so critical in Chinese culture because it's believed that every single spirit will pass through this place when they die. That's right, guys. Fengdu is the location where a spirit will go immediately after their physical body ceases to function. There are 3 tests that the dead will go through before moving on to the next life. First, they must pass the Bridge of Helplessness. Then, they go through the Ghost Torturing Pass. And then finally, they will wait at the front of Xianzi Palace. It's here that the ghost must stand on a stone for 3 whole minutes. If you are to be dragged down to the underworld, then it's at this time that it will take place. All of this ghostly activity has made this place very haunted. People have reported sinister laughs and strange noises coming from this place at all hours of the day. People have also reported hearing blood-curdling screams coming from nowhere. They think that these screams are coming from the torturing of those ghosts. If all of this is true, then there really is no point of visiting this place. If all of this is true, then there really is no point in visiting, because regardless of how you spin it, we're all gonna end up there one day anyways. Number 2 on this list is the Great Wall of China. The Great Wall of China is one of the 7 wonders of the world and truly a sight to behold. The total length of the Great Wall of China is roughly 21,196 kilometers. This wall was built over thousands of years, with the initial construction starting in the 7th century BC. Its purpose was largely to act as a defense mechanism between other nations and also to monitor what was coming in and out of their country. This wall is massive, more massive than anything we can really comprehend. In fact, to put it in perspective, I'm filming this in Toronto, Canada right now. Traveling to China from here is roughly 11,000 kilometers, meaning that the length of the Great Wall is long enough to go all the way to China and then come all the way back. Due to its massive size and means of construction, it's estimated that 1 to 2 million people died from just the construction of this wall alone. These 1 to 2 million people who died whilst making this wall are said to haunt it to this day. The ghosts of their souls still linger around various sections of the wall, with many sightings happening throughout the years. People have seen these ghosts laboring away or just standing at the top of the wall looking down upon them. They've also heard the noises of somebody working or the moans of someone in pain with no person in sight. 1 to 2 million people is a lot of people to have died from this ambitious project. That amount of untimely death has to leave something behind, and I wouldn't be surprised if this Great Wall truly was haunted. It's one of the 7 wonders of the world, so I won't tell you to never visit, but if you do, then just be wary. Number 1 on this list is the Xiaoying Pun Community Complex. This community complex, which is located in Hong Kong, was listed as one of the most haunted places in China for quite some time. It started off, as many haunted buildings do, as an old mental institute. This institute was built in 1892 and operated as a mental hospital until World War II. During World War II, this building was used as a hospital for any people fighting, but then in 1947 went back to its initial purpose of housing those who were clinically insane. It continued to function like this until 1971, when it was eventually closed down and the building was abandoned. As with many mental hospitals from that era, there were a lot of human rights violations that took place. Couple that with some of the death that it saw in its walls, plus its abandonment, and the legend of a potential haunting started to run rampant. In the recent years, this place has been converted into a community center, but even this immense renovation hasn't stopped the ghostly sightings. The most famous apparition is that of a man dressed in traditional Chinese clothing. It's said that his presence isn't uncommon, and he will often engage people in conversations if they're by themselves. It should also be noted that the mental hospital, before it closed down, was ravaged by 2 separate fires. Some people died during these blazes, and the spirits of those burn victims have reportedly been spotted in the past. People have said that they've seen them standing at the end of the hall, staring at them, completely burned and bloodied. With a history like this location has, it's no wonder that spirits are still sighted walking among it to this day. Number 5 on this list is the Alkimos wreck. The SS Alkimos was a Greek-owned ship that in 1963 capsized off the coast of Perth, Australia. This ship, prior to its sinking and also to this day, is deeply haunted. Tatum Stafford details its history and writes, "The Alkimos was stranded north of Mindarie Keys in 1963 and is said to be plagued with bad luck. The ship was built in Baltimore in 1943, and towards the end of the war it was used to transport US soldiers and German prisoners of war. Post-war, the ship sailed across the world with various crew members recounting ghost sightings that they'd had on board. In 1963, the ship was on voyage from Jakarta to Bunbury when it struck a reef off the coast of Western Australia. It was towed to Fremantle for repairs, then was sent to Hong Kong before a storm hit and it became stuck in shallow waters off Mindarie. The following year, the ship was sold for parts and left to decay, though mysteriously a number of fires have started, burned, and further blackened the wreck since it was abandoned. Though not much of the Alkimos is visible from land today, there are many rumors about the ship's history of paranormal activity. This includes the discovery of a swimmer's skull in its wreckage, and the stories of a ghost dressed in oilskins named Harry, who's been spotted on board more than once since its sinking. So nowadays, this wreck is the spot for scuba divers who enjoy the paranormal. They frequent it often and also get visited by many spirits who live there. Harry, the ghost that's been seen a lot, is apparently very friendly, which is a nice change of pace from the other hauntings on this list. Many of the people that have had interactions say that he, although although sad, is just looking for a friend to reside with him at the bottom of the ocean. Even though this is on the list about places to never visit, I don't think that we immediately need to write off this spot. If you're daring and you know how to scuba dive, then I suppose you could probably go and have a pretty decent experience with our main guy Harry. Number 4 on this list is the St. John's Orphanage. Not that anyone would ever want to be an orphan to begin with, but if you ever were sent to an orphanage, this certainly wouldn't be first on your list of options. This place is your stereotypical horrible orphanage. The type of place that you watch in a movie and then call your parents immediately afterwards and thank them for being around for you. Apparently the people who ran this place were just inherently cruel. If a child ever stepped out of line a little bit or even did something wrong by accident, the punishments would be swift and brutal. The lifestyle of any child who lived here was said to be pretty horrible, and those that stayed here were often scarred for life. Now it's abandoned and looks like something straight out of a horror film. The windows are broken and the whole building itself looks like something that society has collectively thrown away. This hasn't stopped the ghosts of those who used to stay here from haunting it though. It isn't what you might be expecting, however. You won't find the ghosts of children running through the halls or playing ball outside. I imagine that the ghosts of those said children would want to get as far away from this horrible place as possible. The one who does haunt this place though is actually the one who used to run it. This greasy and stern looking old man that's said to parade around the halls. Apparently he's only ever dangerous to children, and any adults that come to this place should be fine. That being said, I still wouldn't recommend that adults go here because it's all too eerie to begin with. In my personal opinion, I think that there's been too much awful history here to allow this building to remain standing. I'd burn it to the ground and leave those horrible practices where they belong. Deep in the past. Number 3 on this list is Dream World. Now, how on earth could a place called Dream World be haunted? Well, apparently it all started when the people who filmed the hit reality TV show Big Brother had quite the ghostly encounter. That's right guys, the legends of a ghost at this place have been pretty recent and by an entire film crew. Dream World is one of Australia's biggest amusement parks and should be a place of pure joy. The makers of Big Brother decided to build a home at this place and host their show there. During the filming of one of the seasons though, the production crew ran into an unexpected individual. The voice and image of a young girl appeared to all of them on separate occasions during the filming process and scared them to their core. The show was eventually cancelled in 2014, but then a YouTuber named MuiTube went into the abandoned Big Brother house and it definitely looks haunted. The entire place looks like something straight out of a ghost story and makes me believe that some type of spirit could be living there. It also doesn't help that this little girl isn't the only ghostly apparition talked about at Dreamworld. Apparently some employees at the theme park have seen a ghost called Jack Dark. Jack Dark is reportedly a 19th century gold prospector who was killed by a buzzsaw. Now his decapitated ghost wanders the area where he was killed, and it just so happens that there's a theme park there now. If you ever do make it to Dreamworld, then don't stay too long. Ride the rides and then get out of there. If you stick around for an extended period of time, then you might have an unwelcome encounter as well. Number 2 on this list is the Airedale Mental Hospital. The Airedale Mental Hospital has got to be right up there as one of the most deadly mental hospitals in the world. Now what I mean by that is how many total people passed away within the walls of said hospital during its operation. For the Airedale Mental Hospital, this number was not insignificant. In its 140 years of operating, it saw over 13,000 people pass away. That's close to almost 100 people every single year that it was active. Just an absolutely horrendous statistic that speaks to the manner in which this hospital was run. If you've been watching this channel for a while, then you know that mental institutes built in the 1800s were often horrible places to get sent. The procedures and practices that these places had weren't helpful in the slightest and often made those with mental illness get far worse. This was obviously the case here due to its overwhelmingly large death toll. 13,000 people is a lot of people to die, and it's left its mark on this location. The site is no longer used as a mental hospital and has been decommissioned for a few decades. Now, it's just a spot for ghost tours. Not a tour I recommend that you take, but if you do, you can expect to hear some loud screams, doors shutting without anyone around them, and temperature changes that just don't make any sense. Some rooms are more haunted than others, and there's one specific bedroom where tons of those 13,000 people died that's just brimming with bad spiritual energy. In a few rare cases, there have been instances where people have left the tour with scratches on their bodies that they don't even remember receiving. I understand the appeal if you're someone who loves the paranormal, but I just don't think that it's worth it considering all the negative juju that surrounds this deadly hospital. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Fremantle Prison. The Fremantle Prison is a former Australian prison that has quite the name for itself. This place was known for housing the most dangerous and the most deadly prisoners in Australia's history. Once again, Tatum Stafford writes, originally known as the convict establishment, the Fremantle Prison was built by convicts between 1852 and 1859 using limestone quarried on site. During its period of operation, the prison housed the majority of the state's murderers, thieves, and rogues, and during both World Wars, it was used by the Australian Army as a military prison for POWs. As time went on, it became increasingly difficult to accommodate modern prisoner management systems into a 19th century building, so in 1991, the WA State Cabinet decided to close the prison. Today, it's one of the world's largest surviving convict prisons with plenty of rumored paranormal activity. In its time as a jail, 44 people were executed at its gallows. Just one of them was a woman, Martha Rendell. Martha was convicted of murdering her 3 children, and legend has it that her face occasionally appears in the chapel window. So Stafford mentions one of the ghosts there, Martha Rendell, who lives in the chapel, but he doesn't mention Jack, who's actually a friendly library ghost. Jack is typically pretty chill, but the rest of them are horrible. Martha and the other ghosts that were here are the most sadistic murderers who ever lived in Australia, and they haven't changed much in death either. Going to this place and not being in a big group is actually life-threatening. These are the type of ghosts who will not hold back and will want to murder you for the fun of simply murdering you. Obviously, because of this, I cannot in good conscience recommend going here. There are countless documentaries on Netflix about serial killers, and that is a far safer way to learn about them than going to this prison.
In at number 5 we have Loftus Hall. This place may be the most haunted house in all of Ireland, and it is said to be haunted by the devil himself. Loftus Hall is a large country house located on the Hook Peninsula in County Wexford. In 1170, Raymond le Gros came to the county and built this massive castle, which was known as the Houseland Castle. The Redmond family replaced the original castle with another in about 1350. This second castle was known as the Hall, or Redmond Hall. Later in 1872, John Henry Wellington Graham Loftus undertook an extensive rebuilding of the entire mansion, adding many of the famous elements like the grand staircase, mosaic tiled floor, elaborate parquet flooring, and technical elements that hadn't been seen in houses in Ireland at the time, such as flushing toilets and blown air heating. Charles Tottenham became the lord of the manor in 1752 by marrying the Honourable Anne Loftus, a daughter of the first Viscount Loftus, and they had 6 children. However, his wife became ill and died while the girls were still young. 2 years later, Tottenham married his cousin Jane Cliff, and they lived together, along with one of Charles's daughters in Loftus Hall. One evening, Charles was resting in his home in 1775 with his second wife and daughter from his first marriage, Anne, while the Loftus family were away on business. During a storm, a ship unexpectedly arrived at the Hook Peninsula, where the mansion was located. A young man was welcomed into the mansion. Anne and the young man became very close. One night, the family and the mysterious man were in the games room playing cards, and it was then when Anne noticed the man having a cloven foot. The man went up through the roof, ultimately leading to his demise and leaving behind a large hole in the ceiling which remains today. Soon Anne became mentally ill. It's believed that the family were ashamed of Anne and locked her away in her favourite room, which was known as the Tapestry Room. She refused food and drink and sat with her knees under her chin looking out the Tapestry Room window, waiting for her mysterious stranger to return until she passed away in the Tapestry Room in 1775. It is said that when she died, they could not straighten her body as her muscles had seized, and she was buried in the same sitting position in which she had died. After her death, everyone who had lived there says she still haunts the hall to this day. After being purchased by Aidan Quigley in 2011, this building was marketed as a haunted house that hosted guided tours of the house until 2020, when it was put on the market for sale. In at number 4 we have the Abbey of the Black Hag. The old abbey lies on a small valley about 2 miles east of the village of Shannon-Golden in the townland of the Old Abbey. One of the earliest nunneries in Ireland, it is first mentioned in 1298 and was founded on land donated by John Fitz-Thomas of Conello, who had died in 1261. Remains include the abbey church with 2 small spaces adjacent, and one appears to have have been a sacristy and a vaulted building to the west. There are also walls and a gate and traces of an orchard, a fish pond, and a pigeon house. Modifications to the church in the 15th century saw the inclusion of an east window in the church as well as a doorway in the north. Traces of window decoration, columns, and carved tombstones remain. Burials were also located and the church plate was reportedly found in the late 18th century. It is said that the last abbess terrified the local population with her use of the black arts and sexual practices in a room to the south of the church, and is now called the Black Hag's Cell. After the closure of the abbey, the hag remained there and continued to perform her unholy acts, and it's believed she lived unusually long, which caused her ancient skin to become darker and darker over time. Another legend is regarding the Earl of Desmond, and that during his escape from one of the many battles between the Geraldines and the Butlers, the Countess was wounded by an arrow. The wound was so serious that the Earl believed the Countess had died and buried her beneath the altar in the main chapel. The Countess awoke to find herself buried alive, and when people would see a ghostly figure, they went to her gravesite, and they had found her finger bones had been worn out from clawing at the coffin, and it's believed her screams can still be heard to this day. In at number 3, we have Cork District Lunatic Asylum. The Cork District Lunatic Asylum opened in 1789, and by 1845 the Irish Lunatics Asylum Act allowed for appropriating the lunatic asylum in the city of Cork to the purposes of a district lunatic asylum. The legislation provided for 2 new asylums, a criminal one in Dundrum, Dublin, and then a 500-bed asylum in Cork. This building was originally in 3 separate blocks, later to be joined together in the interest of providing more accommodation. To become the longest facade of any building in the country, it opened in 1852. William Saunders Halloran was an Irish psychiatrist who worked at this asylum from the time it opened until his death, and was the author of practical observations on the causes and cure of insanity. This doctor's methods were extreme and torturous. He created something called the Halloran's chair, which rotated hysterical patients up to 100 revolutions per minute. It rarely had the desired effect. Inmates lived out their days in a state of paranoia and despair while admitted at the asylum. The horrors of this place finally ended when the asylum was closed in 1992. It stayed abandoned for many years, and locals and tourists went to visit this scary place. They claim the tortured souls still remain here, and paranormal investigators even visited and claimed to have seen both and heard voices of these tormented souls. Today the building is being converted and renovated into apartments called Atkins Hall. In at number 2, we have the Hellfire Club. The Hellfire Club is located on Mount Pellier Hill in Dublin. The building gets its name because it's believed to be one of the first Freemason lodges in Ireland. Around 1725, William Connolly, who was one of the wealthiest men in Ireland at the time, built this building to be a hunting lodge. Years after the build, the roof was blown off during a storm, and locals believed it was the work of an aggressive spirit seeking vengeance on Connolly for building on their land, and that's when the story started swirling. After Connolly's death, the building was quickly sold and is said to have become a meeting place for the Irish Hellfire Club. The club was founded in 1735 by Richard Parsons, a known dabbler in black magic. The members met at locations across Dublin and were known for their immoral behavior and debauchery involving alcohol and sex. The secrecy surrounding the club members led to speculation that they were Satanists and devil worshippers. The president of the club was named the King of Hell and dressed like Satan with horns, wings, and hooves. The members were said to set a place at each meeting for the devil in the hopes that he would attend. They were also said to hold black masses in the lodge, during which cats and even servants were sacrificed. Some say the building was deliberately set on fire in order to enhance its hellish atmosphere. The best known Hellfire Club story is the one in which the devil himself appears. A stranger joined the members at a game of cards. At some point, one of the card players dropped a card on the floor. As he bent down to retrieve it, he noticed that the stranger had cloven hooves instead of feet. Another tale concerns a young farmer, curious to find out what went on in the meetings. Climbing up Mount Pellier Hill one night, he was invited by members of the club and allowed to witness the night's activities. He was found the next morning trembling and terrified. Tradition says he spent the rest of his life unable to speak, unable even to remember his name. The Hellfire Club remains burnt out and abandoned on Montpellier Hill looking over Dublin. It is a beautiful sight on a sunny day, but make sure you leave before night. It's a beautiful sight on a sunny day, but make sure you leave before night comes, because you may come into contact with the unusual smells, ghostly apparitions, or paranormal sightings. And it's said that satanic rituals are known to be done here. And finally, in at number 1 we have Leap Castle. Of the many haunted places in Ireland, Leap Castle is possibly the most notorious of all, and is one of the most well-known symbols of haunted Ireland. This place is located in Kildare in County Offaly. There are many accounts of when the main tower was constructed, but could go back as far as 1250 CE and was built by the O'Bannon clan. The O'Bannons were the secondary chieftains of the territory and were subject to the ruling O'Carroll's clan. There are many stories of who or what haunts this place. A red lady ghost is reported to walk the halls holding a dagger, and also 2 little girls named Charlotte and Emily are reported to run up and down the spiral staircase in the mansion. A red lady ghost is reported to walk the halls holding a dagger, and also 2 girls named Charlotte and Emily are reported to run up and down the spiral staircase in the mansion. Emily passed away after she fell from the top of the castle's tower, and Charlotte can still be seen running around after her sister and calling her name. The castle was visited by paranormal investigators from shows like Most Haunted and Scariest Places on Earth. These investigators believe the castle is haunted by a sinister elemental spirit. The creature is described as being about the size of a sheep with a human face, black holes for eyes and nose, and giving off the smell of a rotting corpse. During renovation of the castle in the 1900s, workers found an oubliette behind a wall in the chapel. At the bottom of the shaft were many human skeletons on wooden spikes. When cleaned out, it took 3 cartloads to remove the bones. Today, the dungeon is now covered over in order to keep people away from it. It's believed that the O'Carrolls would drop guests through the trapdoor to be impaled on the spikes 8 feet below and could be haunted by the people killed by the O'Carrolls. The castle describes itself as the world's most haunted house, due to the numerous amounts of spirits located here. Coming in at number 5, we have Ballygally Castle. The Ballygally Castle is said to be one of the most haunted places in Ireland and is haunted by many different ghosts. The haunted castle is in the village of Ballygally in Northern Ireland and overlooks the sea at the head of Ballygally Bay. The castle was built in 1625 by James Shaw of Scotland, but now is run as a hotel. The most well-known ghost is that of Lady Isabella Shaw, or nicknamed the Ghost of Ballygally. Legend has it that her husband Lord James locked her away in a tower where she was supposedly pushed to her death. She is said to roam the halls of the castle looking for her child, who was taken away from her at birth from her cruel husband, Lord James. Many people who stay in the castle say that they are woken up throughout the night due to her knocking on their bedroom doors. The tourists often climb the spiral staircase to view the ghost room where Lady Isabella lived out her final days. In 2003, one of the managers of the hotel, Olga Henry, was once a skeptic of ghosts and paranormal activity. But after spending some time working at the hotel, she stated that she believes there is definitely something in the hotel. According to Olga, one guest was staying in one of the rooms in the tower beneath the popular ghost room, and in the middle of the night he had awoken suddenly, believing he was at home and one of his children had laid a hand on his back. He woke up and said that he could hear a child running around the room and laughing, but he couldn't see anyone around, so he ran out of the room and into the lobby. He was so terrified from what he had experienced and checked out right away and never returned to the hotel again. In December of 2003, Olga was setting up the dungeon room in the tower for guests arriving for a meal. She set up the tables neatly, then locked the room before leaving. Just before the guests were set to arrive, she went back into the room and the tables were now a mess with unfolded napkins and glasses with an unusual scum around them, and were now arranged in a circle on the table. Several paranormal investigators and mediums have come to the castle to investigate over the years. A group of mediums that spent the night at the hotel had reported that they had detected more ghosts than there were guests staying at the hotel at the time. In at number 4, we have Leamonay Castle. Leamonay Castle has an extremely sinister history and is haunted by a woman known as the Red Mary. This castle was originally a basic 5-story Irish tower house which was built around 1480 by a member of the O'Brien family, who were one of the last of the High Kings of Ireland and a direct descendant of Brian Boru. In 1639, Conor O'Brien married a woman named Mary Ní Mahone, and she became one of the most famous women in Irish folklore who, due to her flaming red hair, was commonly known as Red Mary. She was born in 1615 and she was married before Conor, but her previous husband died mysteriously and she gained control of his fortune. Due to the fortune, the newlyweds built a large mansion onto the tower house. In 1651, Conor O'Brien died in battle and the Red Mary married once again and again and again. It is believed that she had been married a total of 25 times. After the Red Mary died, the castle had various occupants in later years until it fell into ruins at the end of the 18th century and lays abandoned to this day. But it's often visited by ghost hunters and paranormal investigators. It's believed that the Red Mary haunts the castle castle after her death to this very day. Mary was said to have a foul temper, and if her servants were to displease her, they would be hung out of one of the castle windows, the men by their necks and the women by their hair, until they passed away. It's even said if the maids didn't learn to do whatever the Red Lady said, then she would injure them so heavily they would bleed. After her death, it's not known exactly where she is buried, but many think she is beside the castle, and locals and tourists claim to have seen an eerie womanly figure walking the halls of the castle, often looking out the windows, giving this castle the name of being one of the most haunted Irish castles. In at number 3 we have the Crum. Located in Northern Ireland, Crumlin Road, Gall, or so often called the Crum, is reportedly one of the most haunted places in Belfast. This former prison was built in the Victorian era and was designed by Sir Charles Lanyon in 1845. It is their only Victorian era prison remaining in Northern Ireland and was one of the most advanced prisons of its day. This prison held some of the most dangerous and mentally ill people in all of Ireland, and many prisoners passed away while staying here, and they believed to haunt the building to this day. The prison had brutal conditions, and children were even held there as young as 6 for petty crimes like stealing food. This prison held executions, and the first known execution was done in 1854 to a man named Robert Henry O'Neill. It's believed over 20 people, including Robert, had been buried in unmarked graves within the grounds of the Gall. These executions were a public demonstration, were held in crowds of up to 20,000 people to watch. Later in 1901, there was an execution chamber built, and the most dangerous prisoners were sent to this notorious prison to be executed. After closing its doors in 1996, it is now used for events and conferences, and during the Halloween season, it's open to ghost hunting experiences and for paranormal investigators. This infamous prison is featured on the list of the world's most notorious historic prisons, and tourists continue to flock here due to the amount of paranormal activity and ghost sightings over the years. In at number 2 we have Malahide Castle. The Malahide Castle lies in the village of Malahide just north of Dublin and dates back to the 12th century. The estate began in 1185 when Richard Talbot was granted the lands of Malahide, and it was home to the Talbot family for 791 years until 1976. The castle was eventually inherited by the 7th Baron Talbot, and in 1973 it was passed down after his death to Rose, his sister. Then in 1976 the castle and its grounds were sold to the Irish state. Nowadays the castle is used as a concert venue, tourist attraction and banquet events. It also features a popular botanical garden, sports ground, golf course, tennis court and a children's playground. The castle's best known rooms are the Oak Room and the Great Hall, which display Talbot family history and are known to be visited often by paranormal investigators. The tragic story of a murdered jester named Puck is the most notable ghost who haunts the castle. Stories say he had fallen in love with one of the Malahide prisoners, Lady Eleanor Fitzgerald. Puck was found out when he was stabbed in the heart, ultimately dying, but with his last breath he swore to haunt the castle for all of eternity. Locals and tourists see the ghost of Puck roaming the castle grounds. It's also believed that many members of the Talbot family also haunt the castle. When in the late 1700s, 14 members of the family sat down for breakfast in the Great Hall, and then later that night all 14 people were suspiciously found dead. It is rumored to be one of the most haunted castles in Ireland. The castle's residents, workers and visitors have all reported similar eerie happenings, and you can learn about all of the different ghost hauntings on the very popular ghost tours, including Puck. And finally, in at number 1 we have Grace Neal's Bar. Not only are castles and buildings haunted in Ireland, but there is an Irish pub by the name of Grace Neal's Bar that is a popular haunted place. This Irish pub is located in County Down and was built in 1611 and is one of the oldest bars in Ireland. Originally this bar was called the King's Arms when it was first established, until it was taken over by Grace Neal. Grace spent years serving drinks to the bar goers. She was known to greet every guest with a kiss on the cheek and a hug, and she was described as having a strong spirit. It's believed by many that her ghost has stuck around the bar ever since her death in 1916. Cold spots are felt around this warm atmosphere, and some have reported seeing a ghostly figure of a Victorian-era woman wandering around the front bar. The current owners of the bar often hear sweeping noises, footsteps, and glasses and cups have fallen suddenly off the shelves for seemingly no reason. Not only is Grace the only spirit haunting the bar, staff members of the bar have regularly seen shadowy figures of men passing by in the upstairs area. Several different ghost hunters have visited the 400-year-old pub in order to try and find answers for the unexplained sighting, including medium Derek Ackera and the most haunted team. One ghost hunter, Mike Hirons, believes he had come across an evil spirit when he was investigating the bar. He stated that the anomaly appeared before him as a ball of light upstairs and was very evil and unpleasant. Spirits suck the energy from people, and he claimed to get very out of breath, and all his energy was drawn out when he was investigating the bar. Grace Neal's Bar is known to be among one of the most haunted bars in the world, and the most haunted in all of Ireland. In at number 5 we have Ross Castle. castle. The Ross Castle is one of the most haunted places in all of Ireland. It's located on the edge of Loughliney and Killarney National Park in County Kerry. It was built in the late 15th century by the local ruling clan, the O'Donohues, then changed ownership to the McCarthys in 1580, and finally was leased out to Sir Valentine Browne. But then in 1688 they were exiled after the Glorious Revolution. The castle then became a military barracks, which remained so until the early 19th century. The Browns never came back but did build the Kenmare House near Killarney. Legend has it that Mr. O'Donoghue jumped or was sucked out of the window of the Grand Chamber at the top of the castle and disappeared into the waters of the lake along with his horse, his table and his library. It's believed that Mr. O'Donoghue now lives in a great palace at the bottom of the lake where he keeps a close eye on his home and haunts many of the newcomers and tourists that visit the castle to this day. Another story is that in 1536, one of the owners of the castle was Richard Nugent, who was nicknamed the Black Baron, and he had a daughter named Sabina. When Sabina was on a walk along the water by her home, she encountered a man named Orwin, who was the son of an O'Reilly chieftain, who was the sworn enemy of the Black Baron. They chatted for a while and they swore to meet again. Over time they met every day in secrecy and soon fell in love, but they knew they could never be together because of the feud between their families. Sounds like Romeo and Juliet. With no hope for them in sight, they just decided to elope. One night they met again, decided to flee together, and they boarded a boat and started traveling down the lake when a storm came out of nowhere. The waves became too much for them and the boat flipped. Orwin unfortunately drowned because of this. Sabina did survive, but knowing her lover was gone, she locked herself up in the castle's tower, didn't eat or drink until she fell into a deep sleep to never wake up again and finally be with Orwin again. Sabina eventually did pass away because of this, and to this day she continues to haunt the castle. Visitors and guests make frequent encounters with her spirit, saying she is still searching for her lover so they can reunite again. And the Black Baron's presence has also been reported by visitors in and around the castle on numerous occasions. Many tourists have frequently reported waking up numerous times throughout the night, hearing sounds of doors shutting on their own and whispering noises. Few others have also said they feel an eerie presence sitting next to them while in bed. Coming in at number 4, we have Castle Leslie. Castle Leslie is a massive castle that was home to the Leslie clan, and the Castle Leslies lay on a private 1,000-acre country estate located in County Monaghan. The Leslie family has lived in the estate since 1665, when the land was purchased and given to John Leslie by King Charles II. So he moved in, and he lived in the castle with his wife, Anita, and family. Many tourists and guests have recalled seeing many unexplained things throughout the castle, but the Red Room in particular was the most haunted of the entire castle. It was the center of the family life at the castle for centuries, especially because it was where Anita Leslie King gave birth to her daughter Leonie in this room. Many of the family throughout living in this castle claim to see people, hear things and feel ghostly presence in the room. Due to so many people going in and out of the Red Room, it makes sense that it's the most haunted of all rooms in the castle. It's believed that Anita had died in the room, and you can apparently see her and John both walking around the estate trying to find each other and be together again. The castle is now used as a hotel room, and each room is named after members of the Leslie family. So if you ever want to come in contact with members of the late Leslie family, many of their ghosts are seen in their specific rooms, and you can book your stay in any room in the castle, even the Red Room. Not only is it a very popular tourist spot and a hotspot for paranormal investigators, but in 2002 it gained media attention when Sir Paul McCartney married Heather Mills in the church, which is located on the estate. Also, various members of the Churchill family have visited the castle due to family ties they have with the Leslies. In at number 3, we have Clifton Castle. Clifton Castle is located in County Galway and was built in 1818 for John Darcy, who was a local landowner and the owner of the town of Clifton. He had a castle built for him and his large family while he was busy building up the town, and it's where they all stayed for the next 2 decades. In 1839, John died and his oldest son, Hyacinth, inherited the estate, but everything went downhill in 1845 when famine hit. As hunger struck, the tenants of the Darcy estate gathered on the lawn of the castle to beg and plead for work or food. However, they couldn't get anything, and many of them died of starvation on the castle grounds. After the family's death, many peasants moved to the remains of the castle for shelter, but many of the poor died here. It's believed that the family spirits can still be seen and heard on the property, and many of the peasants' ghosts are located in around the property as well. The castle has remained abandoned since around 1894, but remains a hotspot for tourists and paranormal investigators. Many believe to have seen ghost-like figures and hearing weird noises when they have been inside the castle. It's believed you can still see John Darcy roaming in and around the castle looking for food for himself and his family. The castle is also a popular attraction during the Halloween season because of the ghost sightings and paranormal activity. If you're brave enough to visit, you can do so and be joined by a tour guide to tell you everything about the castle, ghost sightings, and history of the Clifton Castle. In at number 2 we have Ville Castle. The Ville Castle is located in the County Cork, which is next to the small village of Ville. It was initially built by the Anglo-Norman Hodnet family, who were an ambitious family who arrived in Ireland during the 12th century. The Hodnet and De Barry families were in conflict at the time, and it resulted in the De Barrys and their allies, the Roaches, capturing the castle for themselves and renaming it Barrymore. Then later on, Sir Walter Raleigh gained ownership of the castle. During the 1800s, the castle fell into ruins after many years of being abandoned. It's believed that a faceless woman haunts the castle to this day, and it's Anglo-Norman Hodnet's wife, Margaret. The story says that she had an on and off relationship with a local lord named Clon Rockenby, who had asked for her hand in marriage on many occasions, but she refused. Clon was humiliated and decided to raise a small army to go to the castle and take Margaret by force. The Hodnets fought back against Clon and his men, and a standoff began for an entire year. When Clon finally was able to enter the castle, he was shocked to see the state of Margaret. She was starved and looked like a skeleton, basically, a shadow of her former self. Clon was enraged and smashed her favourite mirror to pieces. Margaret was known for her love of mirrors to remind her of her renowned beauty, and at the time mirrors were a status symbol with the wealthy. After seeing the mirror shatter, one of the Hodnets killed Clon with a sword. After these events, Margaret descended into insanity. She was said to have sought out mirrors constantly to check if her beauty had returned. Apparently, there is one stone on the castle's wall which had been rubbed smooth over the years, said to be the spot where her favourite mirror used to hang. Because she never got her beauty back, she now haunts the castle after passing away, faceless, looking for mirrors around the castle. Many tourists and locals have seen the faceless woman in and around the castle walls. And finally, in at number 1 we have Charleville Castle. The Charleville Castle is a Gothic-style castle and is located in County Offaly. It was built by Thomas More in 1641, and the estate was passed through the hands of Charles More, Lord Tullamore, who was the grandson of Thomas, and when he died in 1674 it went to Jane, then to Charles William Berry. The original mansion was extended into the beautiful castle it is today. Commissioned in 1798, was designed by Francis Johnston, was built between 1800 and 1812. The most famous of the ghost scene is that of the little girl named Lady Harriet, who died after a fall off a staircase in the castle. Another ghost scene is Lady Harriet's uncle Henry Walter, who died at the age of 7 from influenza. Although he died in London, his body was brought to Ireland and he was buried in the family vault. The volunteers describe Henry and Harriet as terrible twins, as these spirits seem to be very mischievous, and there is even a famous picture taken in the castle that shows a shadowy little boy. The library that is located in the castle is said to be a hotspot for paranormal activity. People who have visited the library have witnessed a dark shadowy form of an older person on the grounds coming from the door, so the children aren't the only ghosts located in the castle. The Charleville Castle has been claimed to be the most haunted building and grounds in all of Europe. It appeared on many TV shows like Most Haunted, Scariest Places on Earth, and Ghost Hunter International. It was also the location for many movies like Becoming Jane, Northanger Abbey, and The Green Knight. It's a huge haunted attraction and has been visited by many different psychics and paranormal investigators.
Number 5 on this list is the Castle of Good Hope. This castle is located in South Africa and is on a lot of people's worldwide list of the most haunted spots. A main reason for this is simply how many ghosts reside at this place. It's one of the oldest buildings in Cape Town, and it was initially a fort built by the East India Trading Company. Today it houses the ghosts of Lady Anne Bernard, a soldier, and Governor Peter Gisbert van Noort. All of these ghosts have different origin stories and come from different times. Lady Anne Bernard was the first lady of this colony, and she died many years ago under some very mysterious circumstances. Her ghost is said to frequent this spot and will make herself known to visitors. The soldier in question apparently hung himself in the bell tower many years ago as well. This tower has been reported to ring itself with nobody near it at all, and many think that it's the ghost of this soldier that's responsible. And the last is the governor. And this was apparently a very cruel man who would send soldiers to the gallows for his own sick amusement. Apparently one soldier, before being killed, put a curse on him, and after the soldier died, the governor was found dead in his own office of a heart attack. Now his ghost forever wanders the castle in search of rest. Apparently, the modern day soldiers that have to patrol this place don't even walk through it at nighttime, but they walk around it for fear of these poltergeists. Not a spot that I'd recommend visiting if you ever find yourself in South Africa. Number 4 on this list is Table Mountain. Table Mountain is located in Cape Town as well and is a large and intimidating mountain that overlooks the city. Travel Triangle says, no matter how brave-hearted you are, you would surely get the scariest of experiences of your life here. It's believed that the governor of Cape Town had an enemy among one of the citizens of this town. In order to take revenge, he gifted the son of the governor a beautiful flute. Unbeknownst of the fact that it was used by a leprosy earlier, the boy enjoyed playing it. After playing it for a few days, he became so ill that he was forced for expulsion at a hut in the Table Mountain. He played his flute there until he died. The local people of the area say that the mournful tunes of flute are still heard in the dark, lonely forest. The story doesn't go on to say what happened to the man who gifted this child with the flute, but one can only assume that the governor had something to say about it. The story itself is really sad though, and watched as an innocent was killed. It makes sense why their ghost would still haunt this mountain today. Also, who knows what happened in those last final days of life in the hut on the mountain? Potentially it was something paranormal which has led to the continued haunting. Number 3 on this list is Baron Mpain's Palace. So this palace is located in Egypt and is apparently one of the most haunted. Usually when we think about haunted spots in Egypt, we think about the pyramids. And truthfully, they should probably make this list as well. But today I wanted to pivot and shine some light onto this place, which is arguably just as cursed. Travel Triangle once again writes, people nearby and guards around the palace have seen ghosts and have heard weird voices coming out of this now abandoned place. It's believed that Baron, owner of this house, used to live here with his wife, daughter, and other family members. Baron's wife died in this palace in very mysterious circumstances. It's also believed that his wife was unhappy with Baron due to his extramarital relationships. This made the daughter undergo severe pain and depression, and after a few months, she also passed away under mysterious circumstances. Baron died, and people aren't sure exactly how he died either. Due to the jinxed and haunted experiences the other relatives had long left the palace. This site has been very popular among ghost finders and Egyptian tantrics, but after the haunted experiences increased, the palace has been shut down for visitors, although one can roam around the exteriors of this place. This is among the spookiest haunted places in Egypt. Whenever 3 people die just unexpectedly like that with mysterious circumstances, there's always bound to be a legend around it. The fact that so many visitors and guards have seen evidence of potential poltergeists though, kinda really leads me to believe that something must be up with this place. Some of the stories are conflicting though about what ghostly apparitions are really out and about. Some accounts have talked about Baron himself walking around this place, whereas others have told tale of a mysterious ghost that isn't really connected to the family by blood. This ghost is thought to be of somebody who worked for Baron and was actually killed in this place. This ghost then came back to haunt the family, and it's what caused their unexpected deaths in the first place. It's really too bad that it has to be this way too, because the palace itself is beautiful on the outside, and I imagine that the inside is just as nice. Still not worth the risk of visiting though, considering its current ghostly inhabitant. Number 2 on this list is Cape Coast Castle. This castle is located in Ghana, and some horrible tragedies occurred here over the years. Originally, this castle was built so that people could trade gold and other valuable items. As time went on though, its purpose became far more evil. Slave trade. The transatlantic slave trade was truly a horrible time in human history, a time filled with so many injustices and atrocities. Basically, human beings were treated as animals and sold to the wealthy buyers in North America. The slaves that were sold would often come from these African countries like Ghana. Cape Coast Castle was used as a place to keep these people before the ship would come from North America to pick them up. It's said that the ship would come roughly once every 6 months, and conditions at this castle, they were horrible. They would take these people, separate the women from the men, and chain all of them up, leaving them in the dungeon. The only time the door would open up would be when the ships arrived to take them to North America, where their conditions would obviously not improve. During this time, many people passed away from the atrocious conditions that they were held in. Malnourishment and disease claimed the lives of so many people. Even death wouldn't cause the door to open though. Those who remained alive would have to sit in this room with the corpse of the person right next to them. It's no wonder that from all of this, people have talked about this place being haunted. The biggest sensation that everyone says is just a horrible sense of dread and fear. Granted, even if there isn't any ghostly presence here, I still think that I'd feel that. Just being around a place that's seen so much horror is bound to make somebody feel scared. And finally, number 1 on this list is Menengai Crater. This crater has a lot of ancient legends surrounding it and is located deep in Kenya. Eddie Mwanza writes, the extinct volcano offers striking views of Lake Nakuru and Lake Bogoria. Although the volcano is dormant, there are hot spots on the floor of the crater where steam jets sometimes fill it with vapor. However, its stunning beauty is matched by its dark and wild side that has locals convinced to be the work of evil spirits. People have lost their lives while others have disappeared, never to be seen from again, while others have strayed and lost direction in the cave, only for them to be found hours later unable to explain how they lost their way. This has earned the crater the name Kirma Kia Ngoma, which means the place of devils in Kikuyu. There are also mythical and unsupported claims of some people seeing the devil riding a motorcycle. There's also widespread allegation of a flying umbrella that normally appears whenever it rains. Historians say the place was a scene of violent battles between the Lakapia Messiah, who did not recognize the authority of the Laban, the spiritual leader of the Messiah, against Ilpu Masi. In one battle, it's said that Lakapia warriors were thrown into the caldera, with local folklore claiming that the spirits of the warriors haunt the place to date. So this place is obviously a freaking hazard, guys, with potential soldier ghosts chilling in its depths and also many stories of people getting totally lost and never seen from again. It's no wonder locals are constantly worried about this crater. I was also looking at pictures of this place, and geographically it looks like a major hazard as well. It's out in the complete middle of nowhere and looks extremely hard to traverse. As cool as the scenery would be, going here just really isn't the best idea. Number 5 on this list is Cleveland Gray's Armory Museum. This building was constructed in 1893 for the Cleveland Grays, who were a volunteer private military company. The group helped law enforcement and dealt with other criminal ongoings that attacked the city's streets. They continued helping out the military for as long as the government would allow them to, but after World War I were no longer allowed to enter as a private group. However, they obviously had a lot of weapons and things of that nature that nobody would be using anymore. So today, there now stands the Cleveland Grays Armory Museum. These guns and cannons don't stand alone though, as there are ghosts living among these walls as well. Disembodied voices and things moving when they're not supposed to are all very common occurrences at the Cleveland Grays Armory Museum. The legend actually became so famous that this place was featured on Ghost Hunters, where they investigated the building and determined that this place is in fact haunted. However, luckily for us, and a reason why you still might be able to go to this place, is that the ghosts are supposedly out there for a good time. These professionals determine that the ghosts are not fueled by anger, but just chilling out in the museum and living their best ghostly lives. Still though, there are many apparitions of military men who will appear, as well as ghostly footsteps and sounds that just don't make any sense at all. It's all very creepy, even if the ghosts are only out for fun. It would probably be a pretty cool place to check out, just make sure that you aren't faint of heart. Number 4 on this list is Erie Street Cemetery. This is apparently one of the spookiest places in the state and not a spot that you should want to be burying your loved ones. Only in your state writes, in 1826, this charming cemetery was established on East 9th Street, though it was known as Erie Street at the time. Before then, a community burial ground was maintained near modern-day Public Square. Expansion, of course, eventually caught up with the cemetery, and it's now right across the street from Progressive Field. This growth once threatened the cemetery's existence, as bodies were removed from the cemetery in the early 1900s to make space for the new development. This preparation was shut down when the Pioneers Memorial Association was founded, so the burial grounds remains, yet it now feels oddly out of place. Perhaps one of the most unforgettable stories is that of Jock Ossaut, also known as Walking Bear. Jock Ossaut was the proud chief of the Meskwaki, a tribe that existed in Iowa. Following the conclusion of the Black Hawk War, Jock Ossaut came out east to hunt. He made the acquaintance of Dan Marble and joined his theater troupe, traveled to England, and even came into the favor of Queen Victoria. However, he fell ill and parted ways with the troupe. Legend maintains that Jock Ossaut was making his way home to his ancestral lands, anticipating his demise, but that he passed in Cleveland before he reached his intended destination. As a result, local myth maintains Jock Ossaut remains eternally restless. His local friends like Dr. Horace Ackley arranged for his burial in Erie Street Cemetery. His dismay at being unable to return home caused him to crack his stone grave marker. This ghost ghost has been spotted so many times and haunts those who pass by here. He's even said to haunt the Cleveland Guardians baseball park, which is just across the street from this cemetery. His ghost is forever restless and just wants to get home, but I'm not sure that he ever will though. Number 3 on this list is South Bass Island Lighthouse. Located in South Bass Island on Lake Erie, this lighthouse and the island it's on is honestly rather beautiful. Super cute and super quaint, it's kind of like the place that you'd want to go for a day trip with your significant other. However, you may not want to take said significant other to the South Bass Lighthouse itself. It housed lighthouse keepers in the late 1800s. The weirdness began back in 1898 with Harry Riley, the lighthouse keeper, and his assistant Sam Anderson. Anderson was a bit of a weirdo. He was said to have captured snakes on the island and then bring them to the basement of the lighthouse where he kept a bunch of them. Anderson apparently lost his mind though during the time that he worked at this place. Apparently there was a small epidemic and he freaked out at the prospect of having to stay in quarantine. Triggering a little bit? It's thought that he took his own life by jumping off of the cliff portion of the island. Then later on, the lighthouse keeper Harry was found hopelessly mad running around the island like a lunatic. It was the 2 stories of these men that launched the legends of a haunting at this lighthouse. People are very scared of the lighthouse as they believe it to be haunted with some sort of demon that will make you go insane. A lovely and quaint little spot, but one that if you spend too much time at will literally have you lose your mind. Not to mention the ghosts of these 2 men have been spotted from time to time running around frantically, looking as if all their wits are totally gone. Number 2 on this list is Edwin Shaw Hospital. Edwin Shaw Hospital has truly seen it all, and it's no wonder that it's deeply haunted today. It initially opened in 1915 as a hospital specifically for tuberculosis. Then a few years later, a side wing opened up to care for pediatric patients. Needless to say, during these periods, there was a lot of death that took place. Then in 1947, things changed drastically and became a place for abandoned children, those who lost their parents, or those who suffered. For the next few years of this place's operation, there were a decent amount of scandals that took place. Tons of reports of mistreatment of these children, with some patients even taking their own lives during this time. Eventually, this became a psychiatric hospital as well, and as you can probably imagine, it saw its fair share of human rights violations and scary things. Now, this place is no more, it's completely demolished, but the area is still deeply haunted. Ohio Exploration went prior to its demolition in 2017 and saw its haunted nature firsthand. They write, "Of course, with such a rich and diverse history, it is no surprise that Edwin Shaw was said to be haunted. The spirits of not only the tuberculosis victims, there are 246 buried in the hospital cemetery, but also of those children who took their own lives and those who fell victim to ill fates were said to haunt the hospital and its grounds. Doors opened and closed by themselves, and sounds of spectral footsteps were often heard in the halls. The sounds of a meal being served in the mess hall were heard quite frequently, but upon inspection, the hall was completely empty. Ghostly humming and other odd sounds were heard in Sunshine Village, where the bulk of the paranormal activity was said to take place. Be very careful, guys, of this place in Ohio." Number 1 on this list is Moonville Tunnel. Moonville Tunnel is a deeply haunted tunnel in Ohio that locals are perpetually afraid of. Jim Reed says, according to local legend, the ghost is that of a railroad worker who was crushed by an oncoming train in the spring of 1859. The newspaper article from the MacArthur Democrat dated March 31st, 1859 reads, "A brakesman was fatally injured when the wheels passing over and grinding to a shapeless mass the greater part of one of his legs." Talk about graphic. Most who claim to have sighted the ghost in Moonville Tunnel say that he carries a lantern and is sometimes seen as a hovering orb of light. At least 4 other people were reported to have been killed at Moonville Tunnel as well, although the details, they kind of vary. Some legends claim that Moonville was struck by a plague and quarantine, and that the ghosts are of those killed by the epidemic. Others state that the ghost is that of a pregnant woman struck by a train, and still others claim that it was an 8-foot tall man who was struck. However, none of these legends are quite as popular as the initial one. This tunnel appears on tons of the most haunted Ohio lists, and it even has a pretty massive section on Wikipedia dedicated to how haunted it is. That can't be said for most other places, and just kind of leads to the legitimacy of these ghosts. On the Wikipedia page, there are also extensive stories about the Lavender Lady, the engineer, and the bully, who were all apparently characters that died due to this train many years ago. As Jim Reed mentioned earlier though, these are lesser legends, but still could have actually happened. Whatever or whoever is truly haunting this tunnel, it's clear that it probably isn't safe for us to be exploring. Avoid the Moonwheel Tunnel at all costs. Unless you're in a train, in that case, because considering how our ghosts became ghosts, you might actually be safe. Number 5 on this list is the Carolina Inn. This inn has actually been voted one of the most haunted in America by a few different lists. The University of North Carolina says the Carolina Inn was built in 1924 and quickly became a popular hotel for visitors and graduates of the university. In 1948, the Carolina Inn's most long-lasting guests checked in and apparently never left. Dr. William Jacox was a fun-loving man with a witty sense of humor, had recently retired from practicing medicine, and decided to make the Carolina Inn his final home. He lived in room 252 for 17 years before his death in 1965. As shared by the Carolina Inn, guests that have stayed in Jacox's old room report being inexplicably locked out of the suite. One time, the lock was so stubborn that a workman had to use a ladder to break into the room. Visitors have also noticed strange occurrences such as messy bath mats and previously closed curtains being pulled wide open. Some have encountered the smell of freshly cut flowers despite none being in the room, and felt their bodies become strangely cold for no apparent reason. This is only part of the stuff that goes down at this room as well, guys. Some people have reported seeing a poorly dressed man approach them looking for an unlocked door, and then if they show it to him, he runs away screaming. It's thought that this is the ghost of Dr. William Jacox. I don't know why unlocked doors scare this dude so much, but anyone who's gonna spend 17 years in this hotel is probably a bit of a weird dude. Unless you want to deal with a crazy old doctor ghost messing with you all vacation, I'd stay at a different inn. Number 4 on this list is the New Hanover County Library. I don't know why, guys, but something about haunted libraries is just so intriguing to me. Like, it just seems so mystical and mysterious, I guess. This haunted library is located right in Wilmington. There is a woman that haunts this place who's believed to be a patron. Apparently, she used to donate quite generously to this library, and in death doesn't want to leave it behind. She isn't the only ghost that walks the halls here and haunts the books. There's a male poltergeist who makes his presence quite known as well. He apparently died in a duel that happened here many years ago before this land was turned into a library. Nowadays, these two ghosts make it very hard to do any serious learning or studying considering they haunt the place so much. The woman isn't too bad, she just shows up and looks super creepy, but from my reading, she only actually punishes those who cause harm to the library or make fun of it. Those who come here to learn and to read, she leaves them be for the most part. The man, however, is certainly quite the pest. He often messes with those that come here and makes it very difficult for people to accomplish anything. I love libraries, I think that we should all go to them more often, but maybe just not this one specifically. Number 3 on this list is Fort Fisher. Fort Fisher was a critical fort during the American Civil War. It was used by the Confederate Army and was pretty instrumental for them from 1861 to 1865. This fort was used to protect an important trade post there that the Army needed. They defended this place for those 4 years, but then in 1865, the Union Army came in and was finally able to capture it. This battle was a very bloody one and was actually huge for the Union Army and the overall scope of the war. Apparently, there was a lot of death at this fort, and that death, it's never really gone away. Now, this fort is teeming with paranormal activity. Visitors will often report hearing gunshots coming from thin air. The sounds of many footsteps all running at once as if people were charging ahead. Orbs of energy appear in front of them from no apparent source. There are 2 very famous ghosts that haunt this place as well, Robert E. Harrell and General William Whitling. Robert was apparently an outcast who died under mysterious circumstances and has not been able to rest since. The general was actually taken prisoner and killed at Fort Columbus, but he returned to this place because he feels regret for how he failed in life. He was apparently responsible for defending this place and was not capable of doing so. A very haunted fort that I wouldn't recommend going to. Number 2 on this list is Lydia's Bridge. Who is Lydia and why does she have a bridge and why is it haunted? Well, Lydia is quite the famous ghost. This is a true ghost. Like when you think of a ghost and a ghost story, this meets all the criteria for a good one. Spectrum Local News says people traveling between Jamestown and Greensboro on US Highway 70A said they've encountered the ghost of Lydia, a hitchhiker. If she's picked up, she gets into the car and vanishes before she reaches the requested destination. Various versions of the Lydia legend have been passed along over the years, and there are apparently 11 different versions of the story that are set in North Carolina. It's common for folks to go ghost hunting for Lydia near the bridge. In the book Looking for Lydia, historians Michael Reniger and Amy Greer cite the 1923 death of Annie C. Johnson as the real-life Lydia who died after a car flipped in 1920. That is a story with some history, man. Literally since the 1920s this has been going on, and there are 11 different versions of the story. A story like this isn't just made up. It's not just something that one person posted on Creepypasta that became a thing. No, this has been part of the identity of North Carolina for a century. Countless people have picked up this woman and then had her disappear right before their very eyes. Car accidents have happened from people driving this woman and then getting so shocked that they spin off the road when she disappears. Lydia, or Annie, is a real ghost who stalks drivers along this road and especially this bridge. Although she isn't inherently evil in nature, as I said before, accidents have happened when people realize they were just driving a ghost around. I have no idea where Lydia is trying to get to, but trust me, you probably don't want to be the person to take her there. And finally, number 1 on this list is the Devil's Tramping Grounds. This is in reference to a very strange patch of soil in North Carolina. For decades, this circle of dirt has allowed nothing to grow on it at all, whilst the area surrounding it is home to luscious wildlife. The Sun Journal says regional legend maintains that Satan frequents the area on his nightly walks, pacing the circle as he contemplates his nefarious deeds. Normal vegetation surrounds the circle, but only a wiry grass grows inside it, and no plant life of any kind can be found on the path itself. Visitors have also claimed to see red glowing eyes in the circle. Now, there could be any number of reasons for why nothing is growing on this patch of dirt. Simply because an area of land cannot grow wildlife doesn't automatically mean the devil himself has anything to do with it. But throw in the fact that there are 2 red glowing eyes there, plus a few other creepy occurrences, and we might just have something demonic afoot. Locals have reported putting objects in the center of the circle, then coming back a little while later and having those same items moved outside the circle, as if someone or something did this deliberately. The thinking is that this circle is a place used by the devil to dance or to perform rituals that we don't understand. Having things inside his circle of death doesn't make for a great dancing spot or sacrificial zone, so those things need to get moved. That's why we see the red eyes in the night, and there's an overwhelming sensation of dread in the area. It's the devil doing his devilish things. A daring reporter actually decided to test this theory one evening and slept in the exact spot in a tent. He said that the entire evening he heard the distinct sounds of dancing footprints outside his tent, but couldn't spot anything when he looked out. My dude literally could have been like 1 foot away from the actual devil. No idea how he managed to make it through the entire night, but honestly, solid respect. Either way, this guy's story is an exception, not the norm. I'd avoid this place at all costs, because if you don't, the devil might actually make you pay for it.
Coming in at number 5, we have William A. Irvin. During the fall season, the ship has haunted tours with actors, but the ship really is haunted. The haunted ship began in Duluth in 1992. Before the haunted ship started, the William A. Irvin was open for regular boat tours during the month of October. Historically, this month was really slow, and the DECC needed a way to generate more revenue during this quiet month. Having heard about a failed attempt by Cleveland's William G. Mather trying to become a haunted ship, the DECC decided to try their own hands at a haunted attraction. The William A. Irvin partnered up with UMD to give the school's drama department some experience on production and acting. Needless to say, their attempt was a huge success. More than 2 decades later, the haunted ship is the peak of the Irvin's yearly business. The most common sighting that employees relate is that a lady in white has been seen walking around the ship, noticeably. She is usually up on deck and is dressed in period clothing. Nobody has ever been able to identify who she is or why she is tied to the vessel, There is also said to be a former captain who is still overseeing his ship. He is most often seen in the captain's chair and is said to be angry that the ship remains in dock and is no longer seaworthy. There are another two men haunting the ship. One sticks to the front of the ship and apparently does not understand what has happened to him, while the other sticks to the rear of the ship and has confirmed that he died after falling from a ladder. The family of the second man has come forward and said the story surrounding his death was always suspicious and they were denied a claim to his pension. In at number 4 we have Enga Tower. The 82-year-old watchtower can be found right in the middle of Enga Pa. The tower was built in 1939 and looks over the Duluth Harbor, being known as one of the most well-known haunted places in Minnesota, and for good reason. The tower is 531 feet above Lake Superior and is built of bluestone from local sources. Enga Tower was first dedicated by Crown Prince Olav and Crown Princess Martha of Norway on June 15th. It was built as a tribute to businessman Bert Enger, who passed away in 1931. The dedication was in honor of Bert Enger, a native of Norway who came to this country and became a successful furniture dealer. At the time of his death, Mr. Enger donated 2/3 of his estate to the city of Duluth. This included the land known as Enger Hill, which along with Enga Tower is also the home of Enga Park and Enga Golf Course. The tower can be seen almost anywhere throughout the city and has since been restored. There is a local legend that a man took his own life in 1948 by jumping off the 5th level of Enga Tower. They say his body has been found hours later but was never identified. That being said, there are numerous ghost stories of visitors seeing a man on the 5th floor of the tower before entering, but when they reach the top, he is gone. Coming in at number 3 we have Van Dusen Mansion. In 1892, grain baron George Van Dusen built a monumental mansion for his family. With 12,000 square feet, 10 fireplaces, a turret, and a $45,000 price tag, the home was a symbol of turn-of-the-century prosperity. After 2 generations of Van Dusens moved out in 1937, the building had been used to house almost everything except a family since, being used as a school, training medical facility, and even a college throughout the years. It was vacant in the late 1930s, then spent 20 years as the College of Commerce. It was home to Hamline University Law School, then the Horst International Education Center. In the late 1980s, the castle fell on hard times and became little more than a flop house. By the early 90s, it was headed for the wrecking ball. 2 weeks before it was scheduled to be demolished, it was rescued by Wisconsin entrepreneur Bob Poling, who bought it for $237,000. Now a venue to hold fairy tale-esque weddings, the Van Dusen Mansion has had its fair share of past lives. In at number 2 we have Mounds Theatre. The renovated theatre, an 86-year-old movie house, can be found in Minnesota. The old theatres have been rumoured for the past several years to be a home of community of creepy ghosts. One story goes as the Mounds was built in 1922 and operated as a movie house until 1967, when it closed so abruptly that when volunteers arrived many years later to renovate the place, they found popcorn on the floor. The subject of paranormal TV shows and professional ghost hunting investigations, the theatre is allegedly haunted by a trio of ghosts: a happy little girl who bounces a ball on stage, a cursed old man who lurks in the shadowy corners of the projection booth, and a crestfallen usher who walks up and down the aisles in search of his lost love. The ghosts in the theatres are so active that the owner had a party of 4 Ghostbusters in a projection room sit in one dark and stormy October night. The dim light was extinguished and the room grew chilled. The owner stated that as the 4 sat silently awaiting their fate, shivering in the dark, and all at once there was the sound of a man crying. When investigating the sounds of the crying man, they found a shadow figure in the corner of the room. The figure reported having black glittering eyes and an aura of anger. Because of the odd ghost encounter and negative energy, they had to abruptly end the ghost investigation before it was too late. Another former owner who reopened the theatre in 2001 claims that the spirits of the theatre have gone physical and grabbed them while they were working late at night. Some paranormal investigators have left with claw marks on their backs, but the scariest ghost of them all is considered the young girl. This is the theatre's most notorious ghost and is seen in a pink dress, often bouncing a ball on the stage. And finally, in at number 1 we have Anoka State Hospital. Located in Anoka Town is the Anoka State Hospital, which is arguably the most haunted place in Minnesota. The Anoka Hospital was the first state asylum for individuals that were deemed insane. The building was established in 1898 and opened in 1900 to admit patients from other state asylums that had become too crowded. The first 100 patients were males from St. Peter's State Hospital and were considered to be chronic incurables, men who had lost their minds due to to heredity, causes, or environment. In 1906, 115 women were also transferred to the asylum from St. Peter's State Hospital. Residents were not to receive any type of treatment at this asylum, as this was the final stop for them until they passed away. And passed they did. A total of 86 of the original patients were buried in numbered graves in the asylum cemetery. The original name of the institution was Anoka State Asylum, but in an attempt to soften the image, they changed its name in 1937 to the Anoka State Hospital. Although the name was kinder and gentler, treatment at the facility was not. Patients were subjected to medical experiments and suffered both mental and physical harm. The original hospital complex closed in 1999, and residents were transferred to a new facility located close by. The buildings and property were then given to Anoka County to use for offices and to house the county workhouse. The remainder of the buildings were closed and boarded up. With such a terrifying past, it is no wonder that the Anoka State Hospital has been rumored to house the spirits of past patients. Former employees have reported that while unusual occurrences happen throughout the buildings, the most paranormal activities are linked to the tunnels located below the buildings. These tunnels were used as a way of transferring patients from one building to another without risking escape. Ironically, many patients believed these tunnels would lead them to freedom, and so they tried to escape by going down into them, but after a few twists and turns, escapees realized that the tunnels were more of a maze than an escape route. Without an understanding of where each tunnel went and how they joined together, it was easy to get hopelessly lost in them. Several escapees became so disorientated and distraught that they took the only way out that they felt was left to them and ended their lives. For years, employees would report hearing footsteps trudging through the tunnels, stopping, pausing. There was also reports of whispering and low voices in conversation, but the words were not understood. The paranormal activities became so rampant that most employees refused to use the tunnels because they were just too eerie. Today, only maintenance and security are allowed in them. Today, the county owns the buildings that made up the former insane asylum complex. Although the complex was eligible for the National Register of Historic Places, it appears that time has passed. The current buildings are in a state of extreme disrepair.
Number 5. Island of the Dolls. The Island of the Dolls is a peculiar small island just off the coast south of Mexico City. The island is covered, well, absolutely blanketed in hanging dolls. Just about everywhere on the small landmass. I probably don't even need to really delve into any of the lore behind this island for you to believe that it's cursed. You can just take a look at it and understand. I mean, it's a secluded, abandoned island inhabited exclusively by dilapidated dolls. What do you need? Don Julian Santana Barrera was a man who had isolated himself from the rest of Mexico City, choosing instead to live alone on this small, meager island. His world would be thrown upside down when he discovered a body laying on the shore one day. Shortly following the discovery, a doll washed up on shore as well, having come in from the channel. This event would change Barrera's life forever. Barrera hung the doll up on the island, believing that this would appease the spirit of the girl and set her free. Well, either it didn't work, or he believed he needed a bit of extra protection, because for the rest of his life, Barrera made it his mission to hang as many dolls as he could across the island, scavenging them from the channel, some from the trash, wherever he could find them, until the island's reputation preceded it. And what was once a small, private residence became the infamous Island of the Dolls. Barrera's story would be cut short in 2001, when his body was discovered in the channel floating, just like the doll all those years ago. But his legacy far from ended there. The island has become a notorious tourist destination, only attainable by a boat out of Mexico City. While most guides are happy to take you, there are some who outright refuse the journey for fear of spirits. It's said that if you are to visit, it's best to bring a doll, to appease whoever could still be living there. Ugh. I kinda ran a tingle down my spine, and that's just number 5. Now if you want more stories like that, we have them coming every single day, hot and fresh. All you've got to do is subscribe and creep on creeping on. Let's keep going. Number 4, the Stanley Hotel. Who doesn't love a nice stay at a good hotel, you know? Someone to tend to your needs, breakfast ready for you wake up, and a TV where you'll flick through the channels for half an hour before settling on Ghostbusters 2, because that's the only thing that's on. Let me introduce you to the Stanley Hotel, one of America's most beautiful resorts. Built in 1909 next to the picturesque Rocky Mountains in Colorado, the Stanley Hotel is a great place to get away from it all. It's isolated away from the rest of the world, and if you're starting to wonder why this hotel seems a bit familiar to you, maybe if I called it the Overlook Hotel, it might come together? Yeah, the Stanley Hotel is the original inspiration for the Overlook Hotel from The Shining. Stephen King found the inspiration for his famous haunted hotel after spending a cursed night in room 217, the haunted room from the novel. Amusingly, while the Stanley Hotel served as the actor of sorts for the Overlook in the TV series, it didn't for Stanley Kubrick's legendary adaptation. In that, the hotel standing in for the Overlook asked that room 217 not be used in the film, as it was a real operating room and the hotel Hotel was afraid it would lose business, so they changed it to the non-existent room 237 for the legendary Kubrick picture. Now, I could do IMDb trivia about Stanley Kubrick movies all day. What makes the Stanley Hotel so scary? Well, it goes without saying that it's said to be a haunted hotel. All manners of hauntings have been reported. Eerie laughter, unexplained noises, ghostly apparition, things moving on their own, and so forth. Now, the Stanley Hotel embraces its status as a haunted hotel with gleeful open arms. Ghost hunters are invited to stay in their spirited rooms that are purported to have higher levels of supernatural activity. Unsurprisingly, these are the most booked rooms in the entire hotel. Stephen King recounts that the direct events that inspired The Shining was that while he was visiting the hotel, he was terribly afraid of its isolation and its eeriness, describing eating alone in its giant dining hall, hearing quiet orchestral music played over the speakers in a room distant. Apparently, staying there gave him terrible nightmares of his son being chased by some invisible presence. He says as soon as he woke up from the first one, he lit a cigarette and began to write The Shining then and there. Now, my advice for you if you ever take a trip to the Stanley Hotel, make sure you got lots and lots to keep yourself busy with, but make sure you get some time to play. You know what they say about all work and no play, right? Number 3, Eastern State Penitentiary, Philadelphia. Now, some of the wisest men I've ever met have said that it's always sunny in Philadelphia. But if you were one of the doomed souls interred into Eastern State Penitentiary, it was anything but. Eastern State wanted to run things a little differently than the standard American prison system, dubbing their system of punishment the Pennsylvania system, or Whack and Use John's Philly style, depending on who was asking at the time. The Pennsylvania system refers to imposing the prisoners to solitary confinement all the time. Prisoners lived alone, exercised alone, ate alone, and were only ever accompanied by guards. When being escorted anywhere, the guards would put a black hood over inmates. Unsurprisingly, this was not a terribly popular system. It eventually collapsed inward on itself due to overcrowding, and the program was abandoned in 1913, just 5 years after the prison was constructed. Although this didn't really do much to improve conditions for the inmates there, and really just led the prison to come up with new terrible creative methods of inhumane treatment, such as chaining prisoners' tongues to their wrists, or strapping prisoners to chairs for days on end, dousing prisoners in freezing cold water, and putting the worst prisoners into a pit affectionately dubbed the Hole, where they'd be kept in the dark for weeks at a time. In 1970, after decades of terror, Eastern State closed its gates only to creep them back open as a tourist destination for dark tourists looking to go ghost hunting. A place like this is bound to be home to all sorts of rumors and spirits, right? Well, according to local legends, if you spend a night in Eastern State on one of their Halloween tours, you'll hear all kinds of disembodied laughter, screaming and crying, ghostly figures moving across the walls, and unexplained footsteps. Enjoy the sights. Just make sure the gate doesn't lock behind you. And while we're still on this one, does anybody else think that this could stand to be the best premise for an episode of Always Sunny, like, ever? The gang goes to jail, the gang gets haunted. If anybody knows Danny DeVito's agent, please DM us. Number 2, the Hellfire Club. Don't get too excited. The party won't be meeting Eddie Munson for a D&D session anytime soon at this Hellfire Club. The Hellfire Club in Dublin, otherwise known as Montpelier Hill, was once home to a hunting lodge in the 17th century, owned by one Richard Parsons, a man obsessed with black magic and the occult. It's said that the Hellfire Club was a club for Satanists, as the leader was referred to as the King of Hell and would dress like the devil himself during meetings. Every meeting of the Hellfire Club, they left one seat open at the table, just in case Lucifer wanted to drop by. Stories go on to say that members of the Hellfire Club participated in all manner of dark and sinister ritual, sacrificing cats, goats, and if the legends are to be believed, even servants of the Hellfire Club themselves were offered. Legend has it that one fateful day, a strange man appeared in the middle of the night and asked if he could join in at the card game that they were playing for the night. As there was always an open seat, they decided to offer it to him. During the game, a player dropped his cards, and when he went underneath the table to retrieve his hand, they saw that the strange man they had invited had hooves in place of feet, and upon rising from the table, the stranger had vanished into a burst of flame. The building was scorched and set ablaze in 1750, with many differing accounts as to what caused the flame. Some say it was the club itself that set the building on fire to give a more intimidating appearance and keep out outsiders. Some say the devil himself did it, and some say it was a duel that ended badly. Whatever the cause, the Hellfire Club relocated their activities sometime in 1760, and the original building is left empty, where it still stands today. You can visit it today, and it's a fairly popular tourist destination for urban explorers and paranormal investigators who want to see if maybe there's any residual black magic in the soil crumbling walls there. Number 1. Pavaglia. This list really has me all kinds of freaked out, reading about all these wretched places. I think we need to focus on a nice island getaway. Why not the island of Pavaglia? The forbidden island off the coast of Venice. I knew it was going to be haunted. I wrote this list. Pavaglia is an infamous island in Italian history, once serving as a quarantine zone and final resting place for the unfortunate victims of the Black Plague. As the plague ravaged Europe and paranoia set in across the lands, it was said that anyone who showed so much as the slightest symptoms were shipped off to Pavaglia to live out the rest of their days. Oftentimes, these people would be sent away without even truly being sick, dooming them to a horrific fate. It's said that over 50% of the island's soil is made of burned human ash. That is terrifying. The ground itself is haunted. In the early 19th century, the island was converted from a quarantine zone to a just as terrifying mental asylum, switching gears a little bit because apparently being host to one setting for a horror movie wasn't quite enough. The asylum did nothing to improve Pavaglia's haunted reputation. Instead of being home to the sick now, it was the home to droves of mentally disturbed patients who were made into unsuspecting victims by a doctor's experiments. Doctors at the asylum would impose their patients into lobotomies with no concern for sanitation or the victim's safety. The legend has it that the lead doctor at the asylum, who ran these twisted experiments, was so haunted by the spirits of his former patients that it drove him to such madness he cast himself over the tower of the island where his screams can still be heard. It's been said the island is home to countless tortured abandoned souls, still screaming. Now, if for some reason I told you all of that and you're thinking, I really want to visit, first of all, why? And second of all, you're gonna need to be pretty crafty, as the island is completely forbidden. You'll be pressed to the fullest extent of the law if you're caught trespassing into Pavaglia. Not even remotely worth the risk, if you ask me. At best, you get arrested. At worst, I got no idea.